and welcome back to On The Grid Podcast with myself, host Adrian Kita, and co-hosting today is Ethan Evans. Ethan, how are you?
Well, after the race yesterday, I'm not too good, but I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah, so we're recording this on the Monday evening after the race on the Sunday. You guys will hear this on the Thursday as per usual, but we're doing this on the Monday, kind of straight after the race, getting into the ins and outs of Bahrain. So in episode 3, we'll obviously be talking about qualifying in Bahrain and the race. We won't be doing anything else. We'll probably be doing Saudi Arabia in the next episode, just so we don't have everything combined in one episode. So it's a bit of a break for us and for you guys listening, just so you've got 2 separate episodes on the 2. So let's begin with qualifying. So in Q1, we saw the top 3 consist of Carlos Sainz, George Russell and Charles Leclerc. Ethan, I think we should touch upon that top 3 to begin with. Promising signs for Ferrari, obviously being first and third in Q1. It got me very excited. Of course, it did, seeing my 2 drivers in the top 3. But George Russell was up there as well. Did you think that Mercedes potentially their sandbagging strategies from pre-season potentially have been lifted, and you could have seen liftoff?
Well, I was hoping so. It was a little bit anticlimactic qualifying in the end. You see Q1 and Q2 and you see Russell, you see Leclerc in and amongst the pack, and you kind of think, whilst Red Bull have got a bit more in the tank, you kind of hope it could be a little bit more of a mixed up order. But as it was a little bit disappointing, a little bit anticlimactic, as I said. Yeah.
And obviously kind of looking at the bottom 5, Logan Sargent missed out by the skin of his teeth. Obviously, Lando Norris set the lap time before he did. And obviously, Sargent was eliminated alongside Gasly on debut for Alpine, Kevin Magnussen, Oscar Piastri on debut for McLaren, and Nick De Vries on debut for AlphaTauri. I think we touch upon the 3 rookies this season: Logan Sargent, Oscar Piastri and Nick De Vries. I think Logan had the best chance of getting out of Q2. As we now know, McLaren and AlphaTauri don't have the best of cars. So I think they were the likely eliminations out of the 3 rookies. But Logan Sargent has clearly shown pace, and I think he is likely to make 1 or 2 or maybe multiple appearances in Q2 in the near future, in the whole of a race calendar.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously there wasn't a whole lot of expectation of him going into the season, but I would argue that he was probably the surprise of the weekend, and it was a very welcome surprise to see him, almost getting out of Q2, and then finishing 12th in the race, which we'll get onto. But I thought it was all in all a great weekend for him, and the best of the rookies in both qualifying and the race.
And I think we talk a bit about Pierre Gasly in this one as well. Obviously, starting from the back of the grid, as we know, finished qualifying in P17. As we said in our pre-season kind of review, we didn't know what Alpine had. And from our qualifying session, it was very underwhelming from Pierre Gasly. You were hoping that Alpine had the power to potentially get out Q2. Ocon did, but Gasly, it was a bit lackluster for him.
Yeah, it wasn't the best Saturday for Pierre Gasly. Well, he was in 17th, but then he actually got that lap time deleted, so he ended up starting from the back of the grid. It was a weird one because Ocon had a good Saturday and a poor Sunday, and it was a flip. It was a reverse for Pierre Gasly. He obviously knocked out Q1, which is not how he wanted to start his time at Alpine, but then had a fantastic race to get some points on Sunday. So it was. I think there's promise there for Pierre. Maybe he hasn't got it hooked up over a single lap yet, but we'll have to wait and see what is in store in Jeddah.
Moving on to Q2, and once again we see 2 drives for top 3 in Q1. Leclerc topping Q2 with Russell in third and Verstappen sandwiched in between them in second. Once again, I was getting my hopes up seeing Leclerc in first in Q2, and the same could be said for George Russell in third. that Verstappen, it was likely that he was going to turn up the power and turn up the heat in Q2, and inevitably he was going to be in amongst the pole position hunt. But on an overall basis, what did you think of Max Verstappen over the Saturday? I think Red Bull are really the team to beat once again this season.
Yeah, definitely. They're undoubtedly the team to beat. For Verstappen on the Saturday, obviously, as we said, we kind of got our hopes up, but then he didn't, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think he went out for a second run in Q2. So then you can kind of see, he's finished second, and, he didn't put in a second lap time. And then obviously he had that great Q3, which we'll talk about now. And got the pole.
Just before we touch upon Q3, we'll glance over the bottom 5 of Q2, which was Lando Norris, Valtteri Bottas, his teammate Guan Yu Zhou, the AlphaTauri of Yuki Tsunoda, and the Williams of Alex Albon. Alex Albon, we'll talk about him a little bit to begin with. They saw Williams to get out of Q1 and go into Q2, and it could have been good for him if he didn't have his lap time deleted. But unfortunately, the Williams driver got his lap time deleted. What did you think of Alex's performance? Could he have been closer to an 11th or a 12th place on the grid if he didn't have that lap time deleted? Because he did relatively well during qualifying.
Yeah, Albon showed good pace all throughout the weekend. In qualifying, you would have thought he would pick up at least a couple of positions. Had he not had that lap time deleted, I can't exactly remember what lap time he put in when it got deleted, but I'm sure it would have put him at least sort of 12th or 13th. He is very, very dependable driver, Alex Albon.
And just talking about Norris, obviously finished 11th in qualifying. Do you think Lando outperformed that McLaren car? Because as we now know, that car is an absolute truck to drive.
Yes and no. I think in Q2, he definitely hooked up a good lap and got the P11, but was still sort of 3 or 4 tenths off who was it in 10th place? I can't remember. But 3 or 4 tenths off getting into Q3. But in Q1, he only got through to Q2 because he put that lap time in before Logan Sargent. It could have been it was almost looked like a Lando Norris could have got knocked out in Q1. So yes and no.
And moving into Q3, obviously we knew what was going to happen. It was going to be the inevitable 1-2 from Red Bull with Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez in second. Second row consisting of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Third row consisting of Fernando Alonso on debut in Aston Martin with George Russell. Hamilton and Stroll were 7th and 8th, with Ocon and Hulkenberg in 9th and 10th. I think we start off with Nico Hulkenberg here, returning to the sport after a few years out. Obviously, this is his full season, not his few appearances for Racing Point and Aston Martin, respectively, over the years. But Haas have shown pace during qualifying, and I think it was there on show that they can be in amongst it during a Saturday, maybe not so during a Sunday, which we'll brush upon a bit later, but during a Saturday, they are most definitely in and amongst the top 10 shootout.
Yeah, most definitely. I wasn't really surprised to see Nico Hulkenberg in Q3, to be honest. He's got that one lap pace. This is what he's done his entire career. He's made his name out of being the best of the rest. And I'm sure he'll pick up sort of throughout the season, I'm sure he'll pick up several 7th, 8th, 9th place finishes. Because that's the kind of driver he is. Maybe it doesn't translate to race pace for Haas at this moment in time, but he finished 10th. He did have contact with Ocon on the first lap, I believe. Which I'm sure affected his progress. We'll come on to in a minute. But yeah, Nico Hulkenberg, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in Q3 in Jeddah.
And just touching upon Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll, obviously double Q3 for Aston Martin. Does that show how much progress they've made over the last 12 months? I think I saw a statistic that I think Aston Martin gained 2.2 seconds from a qualifying last year to this year's qualifying, which sort of shows the progress that they've made in the 12 months getting this car together and challenging the likes of Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes now for for a top three spot in the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah, definitely. I think they qualified 17th and 19th in Bahrain last year, and then to qualify 5th and 8th is a remarkable turnaround. It's not just about what they've done over the winter break, though. Towards the back end of last season, they started picking up some good points. When at the start of the season, they were fighting with Williams for 9th. And now look at them, what a difference 12 months make.
And now into our race review, after our qualifying review. We'll do it team by team. So we'll start off with the dominant Red Bull team, first and second place, Verstappen finishing first, Perez in second. The real question is their dominance going to continue once more? Are they going to strike gold once again this year?
Well, if the last 6 years is anything to go by, that means Verstappen's going to finish second, doesn't it? Winning the first race in Bahrain. But yeah, no, I can't see anybody beating that Red Bull this year. Maybe come the end of the season, a Ferrari or a Mercedes will be able to compete for the odd win. Maybe, in the next few races, hopefully Alonso can get in the mix. But over the course of the season, nobody's going to come close. And realistically, nobody's going to come close to Max Verstappen. He was 10 seconds clear of his teammate, who was 20 seconds clear of Alonso in third. So it's going to be a long season, I think, for both of us being Mercedes and Ferrari fans.
Well, with that being said, you did mention the old curse of finishing first in the opening race of the season and then finishing second in the championship. Does that mean Sergio Perez is going to win the championship, or potentially in Alonso? Because I don't think you could potentially count Leclerc or Sainz in that mix as well. But with Leclerc obviously DNFing, which we'll touch upon a bit later, does that mean that somebody else is going to be in the hunt for a championship win?
Well, I'm sure I'll make you feel a bit better here. Remember 12 months ago, Verstappen retired. Verstappen was second, he retired. Gave Ferrari a 1-2. Now Leclerc's retired. Perez probably would have beat him anyway, but given Red Bull a 1-2. So the signs are there. However much you want to take from that, but unfortunately, I think our preseason predictions have not aged brilliantly. This looks like it's going to be another comfortable title for Verstappen.
I'll be counting my lucky stars tonight and every single night until the season finale in Abu Dhabi. So hopefully, fingers crossed, everything can be hooked up for Ferrari, so they can win a championship. But talking about Ferrari, we'll move on to Ferrari, fourth in a DNF, Sainz finishing fourth, Leclerc DNFing. Ferrari reliability strikes again. Battery issue, whatever it was, his engine just cut out for Leclerc, and unfortunately he retired from the race, and Carlos Sainz just got absolutely swallowed by Alonso. I mean, the weekend got from all right for Ferrari to absolutely in the bin.
Yeah, what's worse is on Sunday morning, Ferrari changed the energy store for Leclerc's car, and that was the component that failed. You only get 2 of those a season, and he's gone through both in the first race. So what that means for Saudi, we'll have to wait and see. I'm sure they'll either go back to the first energy store, or they'll have to take a very early penalty. But we'll wait and see. Yeah, but for Ferrari, it was, as you said, it was an okay Saturday, but then Sunday, they're just nowhere. Sainz was complaining about degradation. That's something we've seen in the past with Ferrari. They just have massively high tyre degradation, and it's come back to bite them again.
Touching on a bit about Carlos Sainz, I think even though he finished fourth, he technically didn't lose any places from the start. I'm going to clinch onto it here.
I think you're clutching at straws.
I'm clutching at straws here. Don't get me wrong, I am. But at the end of the day, points are points, and he was there to capitalise on his teammates' mechanical failure, and he ended up getting some okay points for the team. But it's not a podium, don't get me wrong, but points are points at the end of the day, right?
True. It's a very different fourth place finish to kind of if Leclerc finished third, though. I'm sure when he had that engine issue, Sainz's eyes would have lit up the thought of another podium, but that wasn't to be for Carlos or yesterday. But we'll have to wait and see what they're like around Jeddah. They're usually quite good around Jeddah, especially if they can have their engine up high.
Moving on to Mercedes, 5th and 7th for Hamilton and Russell. The real question from me is, Ethan, as a Mercedes fan, are you fearing the power of Aston Martin and potentially being the 4th fastest car on the grid and not even challenging for a top 3 finish in the Constructors' Championship?
Well, if I were you, I'd be worried myself. It looks like Aston Martin currently have the 2nd quickest car. Yeah, I think especially because, Aston Martin finished 7th in the Constructors last season. They have a ton of wind tunnel time throughout the season, which Mercedes finishing 3rd obviously don't. So I think it's going to be another long season. Toto Wolff's already come out and said this is the wrong design and they need to bin it in. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. I don't know whether it's the no side pods or something, but it just doesn't seem to want to work. You've got 2 fantastic drivers there. I think they've probably got the best driver pairing on the grid, but they just don't have a car underneath them to do anything with. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But yeah, no, it looks like it's going to be another long season.
And the Mercedes fan is gone into silence once again. It's another long season for him. But moving on to Aston Martin, who, as Ethan pointed out, probably do have the 2nd quickest car on the grid, which I am absolutely bricking it. I don't want to see that. I want to see them potentially 3rd ahead of Mercedes. That'd be quite nice. Maybe 4th. But I think the real question for Aston Martin is, can they challenge Red Bull and Ferrari up top for the top spot in the Constructors' Championship? I think first maybe a bit of a stretch, but certainly 2nd and 3rd is going to be a real shout for Aston Martin, especially with their pace, their qualifying pace, their race pace. That car just looks outstanding.
Yeah, definitely. I think with Fernando Alonso driving it, he can compete for wins. He can have a go at Red Bull, see what they're about. If he had a better qualifying on Saturday and it qualified ahead of the Ferraris, and if he didn't have a poor start and get bogged down behind the Mercedes, it's very possible he could have competed with at least Perez for 2nd. His pace was very good. That last stint was just insane. He was pushing the car as hard as he can. It was almost as if he'd done 20 qualifying laps, pushed that car to the limit, and it held up. And the degradation looked relatively low. You had Hamilton and Sainz conserving the tyres and still struggling for grip, and then you had Alonso pushing 100%, and it didn't buckle. The tyres held up. He got an easy podium in the end. So yeah, it's looking very ominous for Aston Martin at the minute. It looks like they could be competing for at least 2nd in the Constructors.
Moving on to Alpine and Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, 9th and a DNF for them. Obviously Gasly, I reckon he'd be happy with his performance, moving up a whole host of places into the points, finishing 9th for getting to 2 valuable points for the team. Points on debut, of course. And Esteban Ocon, I think let's begin with Gasly first. I think we move on to Ocon and kind of look at his race a little bit later on. But Gasly, we slated his Saturday. On the Sunday, he came up with the goods, finishing in the points. Job's a good one.
Yeah, definitely. You can't really ask for a better Sunday, really, can you? You start in 20th, you end up 9th on your debut at a new team. Great performance from Pierre. And this is why I think he's going to stand out for Alpine. He has that experience, he has a pace, he has a quality, he has everything going for him. And now if, hopefully the Alpine seems to be a bit stabilised a little bit, shall we say. They need to get some laps in, need to get some running. Obviously, it didn't work out too well for Ocon, but, Gasly put in a great performance. I think he kind of slipped under the radar a little bit there.
And talking about Ocon, do you think him and Alpine know about the rules that the FIA set?
Well, we don't know. It was kind of comical, really, wasn't it? He's out of position at the start, and then he goes to serve that penalty, speeds in the pit lane, doesn't serve that penalty properly. It was the most penalties by any driver since Pastor Maldonado back in Hungary in 2015. And he could have got a penalty. I didn't see the incident with Hulkenberg, but they both had wing damage on lap 1. So, he could have had a further penalty if depending. I haven't seen a replay, but that could have been a fourth. It could be record breaking with Esteban Ocon, but not in the good way.
Well, a good Frenchman and a bad Frenchman. I think it evens it out a little bit for Alpine there. Moving on to Alfa Romeo, and Valtteri Bottas once again puts in another stellar performance, finishing 8th with Guan Yu Zhou in 16th. His struggles kind of continued. I think he's still kind of bedding into the team after one season. I think it will take him a few races to get to grips with a new Alfa Romeo car. But my question to you, Ethan, is do you think that Alfa Romeo look like a dark horse this season? Because I think that they can put in very consistent performances this season. Potentially, I think Bottas could potentially be looking at a top 6, top 7 quite regularly this season.
Yeah, there's no reason why not, really. I was looking at it, I was taking it in, and I thought, well, hang a second. Actually, Alfa Romeo had the 5th quickest car this weekend on the whole. A great performance by Bottas. So that is vintage Bottas, in my opinion. That's what he's going to do in a midfield team like Alfa Romeo. I'm not sure whether I completely agree when you're talking about Zhou Guanyu. He was sort of 13th until the end, and then he pit for softs to put in a fastest lap. I think that was more to take the point away from Pierre Gasly and Alpine. Maybe that tells you where they think their battle is this season. Maybe they think they can be competing with Alpine for 5th place, possibly. But yeah, it confused me at the time. But now looking at it, I really like that move from Alfa Romeo. Zhou's not in the points. And it's a show of intent. They're really going to go after the best midfield package, because that's the mine at the minute. They don't look like they're a midfield package.
Very, very good point. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, especially with the Alpine Alfa Romeo battle very well. Moving on to Williams, 10th and 12th for them, Albon and Sargent respectively. Do you think that Williams are making considerable progress now? They're scoring point after point after point, but I think that if Sargent continues the way he is, I think he'll be in the points alongside Albon very, very soon.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as I said earlier, Logan Sargent was kind of the welcome surprise of the weekend. I think everybody wrote him off initially, really, saying, it's just a replacement for Latifi. But actually, he kept pace with Albon. He was very unlucky in Q1. He could have easily qualified into Q2. Finished 12th in the end, and it was a little bit of a shame that he couldn't get a point on his debut. But Williams looked like they've turned a bit of a corner. It was a typical Alex Albon performance, getting up, competing with the midfield, picking up a point. But yeah, if this is a sign of things to come, then it looks very positive indeed. Especially if they can stay in that midfield.
Moving on to AlphaTauri, who finished 11th and 14th with Yuki Tsunoda and Nick De Vries respectively. But the thing is, I think AlphaTauri performed relatively well. I don't think from the amounts of data that they gathered during preseason testing, I think they've taken some steps forward. And I don't think they're as slow as people think. I think they can battle for points once again this season, but I think they'll be still lower down the midfield order. What do you think, Ethan? Do you think that AlphaTauri have what it takes to battle for points this season once again?
Yeah, definitely. AlphaTauri, we said, was going to be the 9th quickest car. Well, the 2 cars we said were going to be the slowest, AlphaTauri and Williams, actually finished 10th, 11th, 12th and 14th, So Tsunoda was hunting down Albon at the end. He didn't quite get him. I think De Vries was a little bit screwed over by the VSC, and he wasn't pit. I think that's what they said on commentary. The AlphaTauri, if they can put a good car underneath the 2 drivers, they're a little bit unpredictable, I think. But on their day, they're very, and I don't see any reason why they can't get a good hold of points over the course of the season.
And moving on to the two slowest cars during the Sunday, Haas and McLaren. We'll start off with Haas, 13th and 15th for them. Kevin Magnussen in 13th, Nico Hulkenberg in 15th, should I say. It was just a lack of race pace, I think. I don't think there needs to be anything else said about that. Just completely unravelled during the Sunday.
Yeah, it was a difficult one for the Haas drivers. Magnussen, I think, actually pulled off a pretty good strategy. He was the only driver to start on the hards and made it work for him. Finishing 13th, made up 4 places in the end. Hulkenberg, on the other hand, slipped down the order, possibly due to that damage that we said about earlier. Yeah, they kind of look like they've got the ninth quickest car at the minute, only ahead of McLaren, who I'm sure we'll come on to. But yeah, it's a difficult weekend for Haas. There was talk about them being around the same pace as Alfa Romeo, sorry, sort of at in that midfield battle, but they didn't show it at all. Are we looking at Haas from a couple of years ago, or from a few years ago, that's sort of fighting for scraps? We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it's a difficult weekend for Haas.
And from a difficult weekend to an even more difficult weekend for McLaren. They're certainly well underprepared for this season, finishing 17th and retiring Piastri. I think it was a steering wheel problem for Piastri. He lost his engine. Lando Norris was constantly topping up with pneumatic pressure into his car. It's just a disaster for McLaren, to be honest.
Yeah, it's probably going to be one of the worst weekends by a constructor. I know we saw them struggle Bahrain last year, and they ended up getting a podium in Imola like 4 races later. But I don't see the same happening. They say, well, this is what they say. They say that the car's going to develop throughout the season. It's not going to be too great to start off with, but by the end, it should be better than it was last season. Well, let's just hope so for Norris and Piastri's sake, because that was an absolutely woeful car that they were driving yesterday.
And that kind of rounds up our race review. And I think just to end off the episode, I think we should rate the drivers' weekend from 1 to 10. So we'll start off with we'll go from 1 through to 20. So we'll start up with Max Verstappen. I'll probably give him a solid 10. I don't think he could have done anything else better. Started on pole, finished first. What else can you ask for?
I mean, I gave him a 9 because he did. This is going to sound very. This just shows the level of Max Verstappen. He only won by 10 seconds. That's the only reason I haven't given him a 10. That's it. He didn't win. He only won by 10 seconds in the end. I'm happy to go with a 10, but I've given him a 9. So I'm happy to go with you on this one, though.
Okay, cool. Moving on to Sergio Perez. He finished second, started second, but obviously he didn't have a fantastic start, so I gave him a 7.5 out of 10. I think obviously he did well to come through the order. Didn't have the greatest of starts. He could have controlled the start, but yeah, I gave him a 7.5 out of 10.
I gave him an 8. I think he would have had Leclerc even if Leclerc did finish, because he went on to the hards, whereas Leclerc went on to the softs, I believe, on that second stint. And by the end of that stint, I think he overtook him actually, didn't he, on that second stint? And I would think that he would have been able to hold on. I think he had much better pace than Leclerc. So I've given him an 8. So you've given him a 7.5. So round up to 8.
We'll give him an 8. Moving on to the final podium finisher in Fernando Alonso. I've given him a 9. I think a podium on debut warrants a top rating. I didn't quite give him a 10. I think if he battled Perez for second, maybe I would have given him a 10, but I'll give him a 9. I think he did tremendously on debut for Aston Martin.
Yeah, I gave him a 9 as well. He didn't have the greatest start. I'm sure we'll come on to the reason why that was later on. But yeah, he fought his way through the field, past both Mercedes, past Sainz, and picked up a podium. And he looks in very good spirits. So that's a scary Fernando Alonso in good spirits.
Moving on to P4 man Carlos Sainz. He didn't move up or down any positions. He had a steady race, and I gave him a 7 out of 10 overall. I think he did okay. He didn't do anything in particular that made me excited. It was kind of just like a meh race for Carlos.
I gave him a 6, basically the same reasoning. But I thought he was just too far off Leclerc. He was sort of 20 seconds off Leclerc. when he retired. So yeah, I gave him a 6 for that reason.
6.5 as an average for him then. I'm happy for that. Moving on to Lewis Hamilton. He had a lovely little scrap with Fernando Alonso, but apart from that, nothing. I'll give him a 6 personally.
Yeah, same for me. He's done a lovely little overtake, switching the switch back at turn 4 on Alonso, which almost resulted in the crash. But I think that was Alonso getting a little bit of oversteer. Other than that, again, not too much to talk about really. A good pace though, better pace than Russell. And P5, when you look at the start of the weekend when they don't look very good, is P5 the worst result? I don't think so. I think that's round about where they're at the minute.
Moving on to Lance Stroll in P6, I give him a 7. I think he had a very good race. Obviously wasn't up. He wasn't far from catching Lewis Hamilton, but he couldn't catch him in the end. And like if it was a P3 and a P5 for Aston Martin, I could have maybe given a bit higher, but 7 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, same for me. I did have him initially down as an 8, but then I realised that he did in fact crash into his teammate on lap 1.
I forgot that one.
That could have ended very differently, and we could be sat here talking about a double Aston Martin DNF on the first lap instead of a Alonso podium and a Stroll 6th place. So very lucky for both cars to get away from that one. So that's why I've only given it a 7.
Moving on to George Russell, like you said, kind of Lewis Hamilton was the lead Mercedes, so I only gave Russell a 5 out of 10. I think it wasn't anything special.
No, it was quite poor. I suppose he beat him in qualifying, but yeah, it was a poor race from Russell. Didn't seem to have the same pace as Hamilton. You would have hoped he could have maybe defended a little bit better off Stroll or have a go back at him, but no, not to be for Russell today or yesterday.
Moving on to ex-Mercedes man Valtteri Bottas, finishing in the points in P8. I gave him a 7 out of 10. I think he had a very handy race for Alfa Romeo. Obviously wasn't going to challenge the top 7, should I say? But a 7 out of 10 for me.
I gave him an 8. I think that he performed quite well. He went from 12th to 8th and looked comfortably 8th as well. Didn't seem to be challenged too much. So yeah, I gave him an 8 for that reason.
7.5 then out of 10 as an average. Moving on to P9 man Pierre Gasly, I gave him an 8.5 out of 10 purely because of the amount of overtakes that he did. I may even bump that up to a 9. Obviously finishing on debut for your new team in the points, 2 points, and the only point scorer for Alpine, of course. Yeah, I'm gonna bump it up to a 9. I think.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've got for the same reason. He made up 11 places in the race, so you can't really knock that too much. After a terrible Saturday, he made up for it on Sunday.
Moving on to the final points finisher in Alex Albon, I give him an 8 out of 10. I think he did very well to move up from P15, I believe, is where he started, moving into P10. Another good Sunday for Alex Albon.
Yeah, this is kind of a bit weird now. I've got an 8 as well. Exact same reason. It was a solid Albon performance, 15th to 10th. You can't really ask for too much more. He looked comfortably 10th as well. He earned that 10th place. Got a bit of fortune with Leclerc DNFing, but you need it in F1.
Yuki Tsunoda finished 11th. He was scrapping with Albon very well, and I gave him a 7 out of 10. I think AlphaTauri will be happy with that performance from Yuki Tsunoda, especially with him being the lead driver and Nick De Vries finishing 14th on debut. So yeah, I gave Yuki Tsunoda a 7 out of 10.
Exactly the same. I also gave him a 7. He did do a lovely double overtake. He got passed by Zhou into turn 1 and then overtook and then got a better exit out of 2 and 3 and overtook both Zhou and his teammate De Vries in turn 4, which I thought was a lovely little double overtake to get up into 12th at the time.
On debut, Logan Sargent gets a 7.5 out of 10 from me. I think starting 16th, moving on up to P12. I think, again, a very steady race for him on debut. I think he can take a lot of confidence from that, and moving on to especially Jeddah, a quite tricky track. I think that he'll have a whole host of confidence in him to potentially perform well once again.
Yeah, I gave him an 8. Similar reasoning. but I think that, to finish 12th on your debut, no one expected anything of him. Everybody expected him to be last. And he proved us wrong. And hopefully this is a sign for things to come. So, I gave him an 8.
So an 8 is an average for there. We'll just round it up.
You're 7.5, so you round it up. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll round it up. Moving on to Kevin Magnussen in 13th. I gave him a 7. I think after his elimination from Q1, I think, again, he had a steady race. Has lacked a bit of a race pace, but I think steady progress for him in the race, and a 7 out of 10 from me.
That's why, I gave him a 6. Not quite 7, but he was the only one to roll the dice a little bit, to start on the hards, try something a bit different. And he finished 13th. Didn't really have the pace come the end to fight with the drivers up ahead. But he had a solid race. So 6 from me. 6.5 overall then.
Nick De Vries is next. He finished 14th. I think, once again, it's not the 7.5 that I gave Logan Sargent, but I gave him a 6.5. I think, once again, it's his first. It's technically his first race in his full season and in F1. So I don't think he's going to broaden his horizon a little bit more. Obviously, Yuki Tsunoda finished 11th. He only finished three places behind him. He's going to gain a little bit of confidence there. So a 6.5 from me.
Yeah, I gave him a 6, but now listening to what you say, actually, I'm happy to cave in and give him a 6.5. He performed well, better than we thought, given the struggles that AlphaTauri have had. But I'm happy to give Nick De Vries a 6.5.
Moving on to Nico Hulkenberg after a good Saturday. The Sunday kind of unravelled, damage, and him finishing in 15th. So I gave him a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I gave him a 5. It wasn't entirely his fault, because he did pick up some damage on lap 1, which I think hindered him a little bit, and he kind of plummeted from there. So 5.5 for Nico.
Moving on to our penultimate race finisher in Guan Yu Zhou. Like you mentioned there very well, he obviously pitted onto the softs to take the fastest lap away from Pierre Gasly. So for that reason, I bumped him up from a 5 to a 6 out of 10. Yeah,
nice. I gave him a 6 as well. Like I said, didn't quite understand it at the time, but thinking about it more and more, that's a very good move by Alfa Romeo.
Moving on to our final points finisher in Lando Norris. I think his Sunday was just awful. Obviously, it wasn't quite his fault. He had the pace. I think he had the pace all throughout the race, but had to constantly come into the pits. So it kind of wasn't his fault. But I gave him a 4 out of 10, unfortunately.
Yeah, I gave him 4 as well. Yeah, he pit 5 times throughout the race for a 2-stopper. You got to feel for him a little bit. He's used to competing at the front of the midfield, and now he's resigned to 17th in this race. 4 for Lando.
Moving on to our retirements, which were Oscar Piastri, Charles Leclerc, and Esteban Ocon. Let's start with our final retirement. In 18th was Esteban Ocon. I gave him a 2 out of 10. It was just a horror weekend for him. I think finishing very well in Q3, and then on the Sunday, penalty retirement. It's just a slap in the face, really.
Yeah, I think they kind of gave up at the end. They decided to retire him because they were like, well, there's no point really. We're just going to get a bunch more penalties. I don't know how many actual penalty points that Ocon got for his troubles on Sunday, but it's a good thing it wasn't Pierre Gasly, else he would not be racing in Jeddah in 2 weeks' time. I gave him a 3. I felt a little bit sorry for him. Maybe that's a bit of pity there. So we'll go 2.5.
The penultimate, the second retiree of the race. It was the second. I'm getting confused here. It was the second retiree of the race was Charles Leclerc. He obviously had a very good start, moving up to second, battling with Max Verstappen, and then obviously the troubles kind of hit him. I gave him a 7 out of 10 because I think, despite the disappointment of retirement, I think he had a very good race and he was on for a podium finish.
Yeah, I think you mean battling with Perez. I don't think anybody was battling with Verstappen in that race.
Well, at the start, and then Verstappen kind of just flew by, and then Leclerc was just kind of in a world of his own in second.
Yeah, he done quite well. He held off Perez for a good 30 odd laps. So I gave him an 8. I think that I felt quite bad for Charles. He was far and away good enough for a podium. Very unfortunate. Doesn't matter how many laps Fernando Alonso had. I don't think he would have caught up to Leclerc. Yeah, I gave him an 8. I'm surprised about that. You give him a little bit of a low score.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel bad, but as in like I would have been slightly more satisfied if that Ferrari didn't go kaput. I would have probably given him a 8.5 if that Ferrari didn't go kaput. But at the end of the day, it's not his fault. So 7.5 out of 10 for Leclerc
Yeah,
overall.
sounds fair.
The first retirement and finishing P20 in the race on his debut, Oscar Piastri, just trouble after trouble after trouble. I say trouble after trouble. It was just his steering wheel just didn't fancy working. It was just like a Windows PC not wanting to start up. It was kind of baffling what was happening at that McLaren team. But I gave him a 4 out of 10 on debut. I think if it wasn't for that stupid steering wheel, he could have maybe potentially finished ahead of Norris. Well, he probably would have finished ahead of Norris because that man had five pit stops. So yeah, I gave him a 4 out of 10.
Yeah, I gave him a 5 out of 10 just because we didn't really get to see enough of him. He retired so early that he was very unfortunate, I thought. So yeah, I gave him a 5 out of 10 just because we didn't get to see enough running to really properly judge him.
So a 4.5 out of 10 for Oscar Piastri. And that rounds out our 1 out of 10 for all 20 of the drivers during the Bahrain Grand Prix. And that rounds out the episode. Thank you everybody for listening. Obviously we'll be back next weekend when we preview Saudi Arabia. We'll obviously be reflecting as well on our Bahrain predictions, how bad they went, how good they went. You can listen to that next week, but that's all for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following. Thank you for all the good stuff. Thank you for liking our content. And ultimately, goodbye and see you next week.
Goodbye.